In a sweltering Memphis courtroom, Judge Amara Wells, a black woman known for her unyielding fairness, presides over a police brutality case, expecting a routine day. Officer Daniel Holt, a white cop with a violent past, locks eyes with her, his glare icy. The gallery assumes a standard hearing, but Holt explodes, leaping over the bench to strike Amara's face, spitting racial slurs. Bailiffs wrestle him down as gasps echo. Bloodied but steady, Amara adjourns, her verdict delayed. A viral video spreads, but a note on her gavel whispers, "You're finished, Judge." What will her next move be? Before we dive deeper, let us know where you're watching from. If you stand for justice like Amara, hit that like and subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode unveils a twist you won't see coming. Amara Wells woke with a throbbing bruise on her cheek, the sting of Officer Daniel Holt's courtroom assault still fresh, but her resolve burned hotter than ever in her Memphis home, a modest two-story haven where she'd raised her daughter, Elise, alone for 15 years. She sat at her oak desk, sifting through case files under the glow of a lamp, her fingers tracing Holt's rap sheet, a litany of brutality complaints against black residents, all dismissed by a system she'd sworn to uphold. His slurs from yesterday spat with venom echoed in her mind, each word a blade slicing at her dignity, as a black woman who'd clawed her way to the bench through late nights and law school debt. She knew convicting Holt could shift the tide, not just for her but for every soul in Memphis who'd felt the boot of injustice on their neck. By noon, she'd drafted a motion to expedite his trial, her pen moving with purpose, believing her. Gavel could carve a path to justice. Her phone buzzed with notifications, the viral video of Holt's attack fueling protests across the city, with marchers chanting her name outside City Hall, their signs demanding accountability. Amara's heart swelled, thinking she'd sparked a movement, her pain a catalyst for change in a city scarred by inequality. She stepped onto her porch, the humid 90-degree air thick with the scent of magnolias, and waved to a passing protester, a young black man with a megaphone, his voice hoarse but unbroken. For a moment, she felt invincible, the weight of that cryptic note on her gavel, "You're finished, Judge," fading like a bad dream. But the system had other plans, and they moved fast, like a storm rolling in over the Mississippi River. Her email pinged with a formal letter from the Judicial Board, a faceless panel she'd always respected, now claiming her emotional bias from the assault compromised her impartiality. Effective immediately, they suspended her, stripping her robe and gavel, her life's work, in one cold sentence. Amara's stomach churned, her fingers gripping the phone as she read the words again, each one a betrayal from a system she'd served for 2 decades. She called her mentor, Judge Harris, a grizzled veteran who'd warned her about the old boys' club, but his line went to voicemail, leaving her alone with her fury. She paced her living room, the hardwood creaking under her bare feet, her mind racing to salvage her plan. The protests outside grew louder, their chants now mixed with sirens, a reminder that Memphis was a tinderbox and she was the match. That night, as she tucked Elise into bed, her 17-year-old daughter's eyes, wide with worry, searched her face for answers. Elise, a straight-A student with dreams of Howard University, asked if the protesters would keep them safe, her voice trembling. Amara forced a smile, brushing a braid from Elise's forehead, promising they'd weather this storm together, but her heart sank, knowing the note's threat lingered. At 2 in the morning, a crash jolted her awake, glass shattering downstairs like a gunshot in the quiet. She grabbed a baseball bat from her closet, her pulse hammering, and crept to the staircase, the air heavy with the stench of spray paint. Her living room was a wreckage, windows smashed, furniture upended and walls defaced with racial slurs, jagged letters screaming hatred in red and white. The word traitor stood out, scrawled across a photo of her swearing in ceremony, her proudest day now defiled. Amara's knees buckled, but she steadied herself, checking Elise's room, finding her curled up, sobbing, clutching her phone. Elise whispered that kids at school had started a group chat, mocking her mother, calling her a race-baiter who deserved Holt's fist, their cruelty a knife twisting deeper than the vandalism. Amara held her daughter, her own tears falling. Silently, vowing to protect her, but the weight of their isolation grew heavier. She called the police, expecting support, but the responding officer, a white man with a thin smile, jotted notes slowly, his eyes lingering on the slurs as if they were graffiti tags, not daggers aimed at her soul. By dawn she'd cleaned what she could, her hands raw from scrubbing, but the stains lingered, a reminder of the city's underbelly. Thinking the protests might shield her, Amara drove to a community center 3 miles away, a brick building, buzzing with activists planning a march. She shared Holt's brutality records, scanned from her files with a local organizer, a fierce woman named Keisha, who promised to amplify them online. The post went viral within hours, racking up 100,000 views with comments calling for Holt's badge and Gaines's resignation, the chief prosecutor who'd defended Holt's ilk for years. Amara felt a flicker of hope, believing the truth was her armor, that the people's voices would drown out the board's cowardice. She returned home exhausted but emboldened, ready to draft her appeal to the board, her fingers itching to fight back. But the system struck again, faster and crueler, like a snake she'd underestimated. Her phone lit up with breaking news. Alerts, a headline screaming that Judge Amara Wells had accepted bribes to sway cases, a lie so bold it stole her breath. Chief Prosecutor Ronald Gaines, a towering figure with slick suits and a politician's grin, stood at a podium, his voice smooth as he unveiled evidence of wire transfers to Amara's account, fabricated documents flashing on screens behind him. The media, her former allies, swallowed the bait, with anchors dissecting her fall on evening broadcasts, their words slicing her reputation to ribbons. Amara checked her bank account, her hands shaking, finding no trace of the alleged funds, but the damage was done, her name now synonymous with corruption. Social media turned vicious, with strangers calling her a sellout, a disgrace to the bench, their venom laced with racial undertones that stung worse than the slurs on her walls. She called Keisha, hoping the activists would rally, but even they hesitated, their texts cautious, doubting her integrity. Amara's chest tightened, the air in her home feeling thinner, as if the walls were closing in. She sank onto her couch, the same one she'd sat on with Elise watching old sitcoms, now a witness to her unraveling. The protests outside dwindled, replaced by jeers from a small crowd across the street, their signs branding her a liar, their faces a mix of neighbors she'd once greeted and strangers fueled by Gaines's lies. She thought of Holt, his smirk in court, and realized Gaines was the puppet master, his influence stretching beyond the courtroom, a man who'd built a career shielding cops like Holt while black families paid the price. As she stood to lock her doors, a roar outside stopped her cold, the acrid smell of smoke seeping through her cracked windows. She ran to the front yard, her bare feet stinging on the gravel, and saw her car, a reliable sedan she'd driven for a decade, engulfed. In flames, its frame a skeleton in the 95-degree night. Firefighters arrived, their hoses dousing the blaze, but one whispered to another, loud enough for her to hear that she'd probably torched it for attention, their laughter a fresh wound. Amara stood frozen, the heat from the fire licking her skin, her mind replaying the note's warning, now a prophecy unfolding. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a voicemail from an unknown number, the voice low and deliberate, dripping with malice. "Quit or Elise pays," it said, each syllable a hammer to her heart. She played it again, her hands trembling, the threat against her daughter shattering any illusion of safety. Amara looked at the smoldering wreck of her car, the defaced walls of her home and the fading chance of a movement she'd ignited, now turning to ash under Gaines's lies. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, and vowed to fight, not just for herself but for Elise, for every black soul in Memphis crushed by a system that protected men like Holt and Gaines. The suspension had taken her bench, the vandalism her peace and the bribery lie her name. But they hadn't taken her will. She'd find a way to expose Gaines, to make Holt pay, even if it meant wading through a city that now saw her as the enemy. But as she turned back to her house, the voicemail's echo lingered, a chilling promise that the next blow would cut deeper, and Gaines, with his power and malice, was only getting started. What could she do against a man who turned truth into a weapon? Amara Wells stood in her Memphis kitchen, the faint smell of burnt rubber from her torched car lingering in the humid 92-degree air, her fingers clutching a USB drive with evidence of Officer Daniel Holt's brutality, a lifeline she'd salvaged from the wreckage of her vandalized home. The sting of her suspension and the media's betrayal, branding her a bribe-taking fraud, gnawed at her, but the protests outside, though smaller now, still carried her name, their chants a faint pulse of hope in a city teetering on chaos. She'd spent the night emailing Holt's records to every activist she trusted, her laptop screen glowing in the dark, each click a defiance against Chief Prosecutor Ronald Gaines's lies that had turned her into Memphis's villain. By morning, her inbox buzzed with replies, a local group called Justice Now vowing to amplify her evidence at a rally downtown, their leader, a fiery preacher named Marcus, texting her a photo of a crowd swelling outside City Hall, signs reading, "Free Judge Wells," waving like flags in a storm. Amara's chest loosened, her breath steadying for the first time in days, believing the truth might claw its way through Gaines's web of deceit, that the people's voices could force the judicial board to reinstate her. She kissed her daughter, Elise, goodbye, the 17-year-old's eyes heavy with fear as she left for college, her backpack slung over one shoulder, whispering, "Stay safe, Mum." Amara nodded, hiding her own dread, the voicemail's threat. Against Elise, quit or she pays, looping in her mind like a siren. She drove 2 miles to the rally, her sedan's replacement a borrowed clunker that rattled over potholes, the Mississippi River glinting to her west as she rehearsed her appeal to the crowd, imagining their cheers drowning out the slurs scrawled on her walls. The rally was electric, a sea of faces, mostly black and brown, chanting for justice. Marcus's voice booming through a megaphone, reading Holt's rap sheet to gasps and shouts. Amara stepped forward, her voice steady, urging Memphis to hold, the system accountable, and for a moment she felt like the judge again. Her gavel replaced by a microphone, her words a verdict against corruption. The crowd roared, phones filming, and she thought she'd turned the tide, that Gaines's lies would crumble under this wave of fury. But the system, like a beast cornered, struck back with a vengeance she hadn't foreseen, its claws sharper than she'd imagined. As she left the rally, sirens wailed, and 3 police cruisers screeched to a halt, officers swarming her like hornets, their guns drawn, barking that she was under arrest for judicial misconduct. Handcuffs snapped around her wrists, cold, steel biting her skin, and they paraded her through the crowd, cameras flashing, her face plastered on live TV as anchors narrated her fall with glee. The rally dissolved into chaos, protesters shouting, some shoving officers. But Amara, head high despite the humiliation, was shoved into a cruiser, her heart pounding as she saw Marcus tackled, his megaphone skidding across the pavement. At the station, Gaines himself appeared, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the flickering fluorescent lights, his smirk as sharp as a blade as he listed charges, claiming her biased rulings had endangered Memphis. She demanded proof, her voice echoing in the interrogation room, but he just chuckled, leaving her to stew in a cell, the clang of the door a death knell to her hopes. Released on bail by evening, thanks to a lawyer friend, Amara returned home, her body aching, only to find her sister Tanya, a nurse who'd been her rock, sobbing on the couch. Tanya revealed she'd been fired from her hospital job, the director citing budget cuts, but whispering it was pressure from Gaines's allies who sat on the hospital board. Amara's stomach twisted, guilt flooding her, knowing her fight had cost Tanya her livelihood, her sister's 20-year career erased in a day. As she comforted Tanya, her phone lit up with texts from Elise, each one a dagger. Her daughter's college group chat had exploded with death threats, anonymous, cowards calling her the traitor's kid, one message warning she'd end up like her mom. Amara's hands shook, her mind flashing to the voicemail. The threat now a reality, creeping closer to Elise, who was 400 miles away at school, alone and exposed. She called campus security, her voice cracking, begging for protection. But the officer's tone was dismissive, saying they'd look into it, leaving her powerless. Thinking she'd safeguarded her evidence, Amara drove to a bank a mile away, where she'd hidden a duplicate USB in a safe deposit box, her last hope to expose Holt and Gaines. But when she opened the box, her breath caught. The drive gone, replaced by a slip of paper reading, "You can't win." Her vision blurred, rage and fear colliding, as she realized Gaines's operatives had breached even this sanctuary, their reach deeper than she'd feared. She stumbled back to her car, the 90-degree dusk heavy with the scent of asphalt, her mind scrambling for a plan, believing she'd hit rock bottom, that nothing could cut deeper. But Gaines wasn't done. His next blow a masterstroke of cruelty that rewrote her identity. That night her phone buzzed with alerts, a viral deepfake video spreading like wildfire, showing Amara, or a chillingly perfect replica, confessing to taking bribes, her voice manipulated to sound broken, admitting she'd framed Holt for personal gain. The video racked up 1 million views in hours, comments flooding with hatred, calling her a disgrace, a sellout, the racial undertones thick in phrases like typical corrupt judge. Even Marcus texted, his tone wary, asking if the video was real, the activist she'd trusted now doubting her. Amara's throat tightened, her reflection in the phone screen a stranger, her legacy as a black woman who'd fought for justice now a punchline. She smashed her phone against the wall, the crack echoing in her silent home, but the damage was done. Her credibility in tatters, the rally's momentum snuffed out. As she swept up the shards, a neighbor pounded on her door, shouting that something was wrong outside. Amara stepped onto her porch, the air thick with a sickly sweet odor, and saw her dog, a loyal mutt named Jasper, who'd slept at her feet for a decade, lying lifeless on the grass, foam at his mouth, a note pinned to his collar. "You're next." Her scream caught in her throat, her knees hitting the dirt as she cradled Jasper, his fur still warm, the poison's cruelty a message from Gaines, a warning that no part of her life was safe. She buried him in the backyard, her hands blistered from digging, each shovelful fueling her rage, the note's words searing into her mind. The arrest had stripped her dignity, Tanya's firing and Elise's threats her family, the evidence theft her leverage, and now the deep fake and Jasper's death had taken her name and her peace. Yet as she stood over the fresh grave, the city's skyline a jagged silhouette against the moon, Amara's resolve hardened, a fire kindling in her chest. She'd lost everything, but she wouldn't let Gaines erase her truth. Holt's brutality, Gaines's corruption, they were the real poison, and she'd expose them, even if it meant becoming a ghost in her own city. But as she turned back to her house, the note's threat loomed, and Gaines's shadow grew larger. His next move a mystery that could strike anywhere, anyone. Comment number 1 if you're outraged by Gaines's lies twisting Amara's fight for justice. And hit that like and subscribe to follow her battle against a system stacked against her. Can Amara find a new ally to reclaim her stolen evidence, or will Gaines's next strike hit even closer to her heart? Amara Wells hunched over a chipped table in a Memphis diner, the greasy air thick with the scent of fried onions, her eyes locked on Detective Lena Brooks, a black woman in her 30s, whose sharp gaze and dog-eared notebook promised answers in a city that had stripped Amara bare. The sting of her arrest, Tanya's firing and Jasper's poisoning burned like open wounds, but the stolen USB drive snatched from her safe deposit box was the cruelest cut, leaving her evidence against Officer Daniel Holt and Chief Prosecutor Ronald Gaines in the wind. Lena, a 10-year veteran who'd clashed with Gaines's cronies, slid a folder across the table, her voice low, revealing a police union's scheme to bury brutality cases, raking in millions while black families like Amara's bled. The folder held emails tying Gaines to the union, proof he'd shielded Holt's violence for profit, each page a spark in Amara's chest, rekindling her fight to reclaim her bench and her name. They hatched a plan to expose this at a city council, meeting 2 days away, a public stage where Amara could lay Gaines's corruption bare, believing Lena's insider knowledge and her own testimony could force the feds to act. She spent 48 hours prepping, her motel room a fortress of papers and coffee cups, the 90-degree heat seeping through cracked windows as she memorized stats. 70% of brutality complaints in Memphis involved black victims, 90% dismissed without trial. Elise, safe for now at college 400 miles away, called nightly, her voice a lifeline, though Amara lied about the death threats to keep her daughter's fear at bay. Tanya, crashing on Amara's couch after losing her job, cooked gumbo to lift their spirits, her laughter a rare light in the dark. And Amara felt a flicker of hope, thinking this alliance with Lena could outmaneuver Gaines's lies that had painted her as a corrupt judge. The council meeting loomed, a beige chamber packed with suits and skeptics, the air buzzing with tension as Amara took the podium, her black blazer crisp despite the sweat beading on her neck. She spoke with fire, detailing Gaines's union ties, Lena nodding from the back, her presence a shield. The crowd murmured, some council members shifting uncomfortably, and Amara believed she'd cracked their armor, that justice might finally tilt her way. But trust, like glass, shatters fast, and Lena, coerced by Gaines's threats to her own family, had leaked their plan, a betrayal Amara never saw coming. The council chair, a grey-haired man with Gaines's campaign donations lining his pockets, cut her off mid-sentence, dismissing her as unstable, his gavel slamming like a guillotine. The room erupted, supporters shouting, but security hustled Amara out, her pleas drowned by the chair's monotone ruling. She stumbled into the parking lot, the 95-degree dusk heavy with exhaust, her heart pounding as she realized Lena's absence, her ally gone without a word. Before she could process the sting, a pickup truck roared up, 3 of Holt's loyalists piling out, their faces twisted with hate, one spitting a racial slur that echoed the vandalism on her walls. They swung bats, aiming for her knees, and Amara ran, her heels snapping as she dove into a construction site 100 yards away, the skeletal frame of a half-built office her only cover. Raybar scraped her palms, her breath ragged as she ducked behind a concrete pillar, the men's curses fading into the night. Bruised and bleeding, she limped to a gas station 2 miles away, her phone buzzing with texts from Tanya, warning her to stay low. Thinking she'd escaped, Amara hitched a ride to her motel, a rundown spot 10 miles from downtown, and uploaded Lena's emails to a local blog, her fingers trembling but defiant. The post exploded online, racking up 200,000 views by dawn, with comments calling for Gaines's head, the union's exposure reigniting protests across Memphis. Amara exhaled, believing she'd outflanked Gaines, that the public's rage would shield her family and force accountability. She sank onto the motel's lumpy bed, the hum of a window unit her only company, picturing Elise's smile, Tanya's gumbo, and a courtroom where she'd wield her gavel again. But Gaines, a predator who thrived on control, wasn't done, his next move a dagger to her core. Her phone rang at 3 in the morning, a blocked number, and a distorted voice confirmed her worst fear. Tanya had been kidnapped, snatched from the motel while Amara was at the council meeting, Gaines's men demanding she retract her claims or her sister would die. Amara's scream caught in her throat, her hands shaking as she dialed Tanya's phone, getting only voicemail, her sister's cheerful greeting a cruel mockery. She paced the room, the walls closing in, her mind racing to save Tanya, who'd lost her job because of Amara's fight, now paying a steeper price. She called the police, her voice hoarse, but the dispatcher, likely in Gaines's pocket, claimed no report matched her description, leaving her stranded. As she reloaded the blog to check the post's reach, a blast shook the motel, the ground quaking as a pipe bomb detonated outside, its roar swallowing the night. Shrapnel grazed her arm, a hot sting that sent her diving to the floor, glass from the shattered window raining over her. She crawled to the door, her shoulder bleeding, and saw flames licking the parking lot, the motel's neon sign a twisted wreck. Firefighters arrived, their hoses battling the blaze, but one muttered a slur under his breath, tying Amara to the trouble she'd caused, their apathy another blow. She staggered to a nearby alley, the 90-degree night air thick with smoke, her body bruised, her arm throbbing, and her heart shattered by Tanya's absence. The council's dismissal had crushed her momentum. Lena's betrayal her trust, the ambush her safety, and now Tanya's kidnapping and the bomb had stolen her family and her refuge. The blog's success, her fleeting victory, was ashes in Gaines's shadow, his reach suffocating, his hatred for her. A black woman who dared to challenge his empire, fueling every strike. Amara clutched her phone, the screen cracked but glowing, and opened a photo of Tanya, her sister's smile, a beacon in the dark. She wouldn't retract, wouldn't bow, even as Gaines's threat loomed, his men holding Tanya somewhere in Memphis's underbelly. The slurs, the bats, the bomb, they were Gaines's language, but Amara spoke in truth, and she'd find a way to save her sister, expose the Union, and make Holt pay, even if it meant walking through fire. Her arm bled, her motel burned, and her sister was gone. But her resolve, forged in a lifetime of fighting racism's weight, held firm. She slipped into the shadows, the city's pulse a drumbeat of danger, knowing Gaines's next move would be deadlier, his patience thinning as her defiance grew. The pipe bomb's echo lingered, a warning that Memphis was a battlefield, and Amara, bruised but unbroken, was running out of allies. Amara Wells crouched in a Memphis alley, the pipe bomb's smoke still stinging her eyes, her arm bandaged from shrapnel, her heart a raw wound as Tanya's kidnapping by Chief Prosecutor Ronald Gaines's men consumed her every thought. The 90-degree night air thick with the stench of charred asphalt from the motel's ruins. Lena's betrayal and the ambush had shattered her trust, but the viral blog post exposing Gaines's police union scheme, now at 300,000 views, was a lifeline, its ripples stirring whispers of federal probes. She'd fled to a friend's attic 10 miles from downtown, a cramped hideout where she pored over texts from activists, their support dwindling but stubborn, urging her to keep fighting despite the deepfake that had branded her a liar. Her daughter, Elise, 400 miles away at college, sent a shaky voicemail begging her to stay safe. But Amara couldn't tell her about Tanya, couldn't burden her with the terror of Gaines's reach. A tip from a retired bailiff led her to Clarence Moore, a former judge in his 70s, his name a legend in Memphis, for battling corruption before Gaines's allies forced him out. She met him at a deserted diner 5 miles from the river, its neon sign flickering, the air heavy with grease and 95-degree heat. Clarence, his hands gnarled but steady, shared a ledger proving Gaines had buried brutality cases for decades, each entry a black life crushed by Holt's ilk, dismissed for Union cash. Amara's pulse quickened, her fingers tracing the faded ink, believing Clarence's testimony could topple Gaines and free Tanya, restoring her name as a black judge who'd stood for justice. They planned to slip the ledger to a federal contact, a move to bypass Gaines's grip on local courts, and Amara felt a spark of control, thinking this alliance could outwit the system that had suspended her, arrested her, and stolen her sister. She hid a recorder in her pocket, a precaution after Lena's double cross, and sipped bitter coffee as Clarence mapped their strategy, his voice a gravelly anchor in her storm. But the diner's quiet was a lie, and Gaines, a predator who sniffed out defiance, had laid a trap sharper than Amara's caution. The door burst open, 4 cops loyal to Gaines storming in, their badges glinting, accusing her of extorting Clarence, a charge as absurd as it was vicious. Amara's heart slammed against her ribs, her eyes darting to Clarence, who froze, his silence a red flag she'd missed. She hit record, her thumb trembling, and shouted her innocence, but the cops grabbed her, one spitting a racial slur that echoed Holt's courtroom hate, their cuffs snapping tight as they dragged her toward the door. Thinking fast, she slipped the recorder to a waitress, a young black woman who'd eyed the scene warily, whispering, "Get this out." The cops didn't notice, too busy shoving Amara into a cruiser, but Clarence's averted gaze burned, hinting he'd been coerced, another pawn in Gaines's game. At the station, she faced a second arrest, the charge now obstruction of justice. Her face splashed across TV screens again, anchors gleefully narrating her crime spree as protesters clashed outside, their chants drowned by sirens. The cell's concrete chilled her bones, her arm throbbing under the bandage. But the waitress, bless her courage, leaked the recording online, its audio capturing the cops' slurs and lies, sparking riots across Memphis by dawn. The video hit 1 million views, hashtags like Free Amara trending, and Amara, released on bail by a sympathetic judge, thought she'd turned the tide, that the public's fury would force Gaines to blink. She limped to a safe house 7 miles away, a boarded-up duplex where she called Elise, her voice steady to mask her dread, promising they'd reunite soon. But Gaines, a man who thrived on chaos, struck back with a cruelty that tore at her core. Her phone buzzed with a call from Elise's college, 400 miles north, the dean's voice shaking as he reported an attack. Her daughter's dorm had been set ablaze, flames gutting her room, Elise hospitalized with burns and smoke inhalation. Amara's knees buckled, her scream silent as she clutched the phone. The image of Elise, her brilliant girl with dreams of law school, now fighting for breath, shattering her. She called the hospital, her hands shaking, learning Elise was stable, but scarred. The fire ruled arson, with graffiti on the dorm walls echoing the slurs from her home. The police, likely Gaines's allies, called it a prank gone wrong, their dismissal a knife in Amara's gut, another black life discounted. She booked a bus to see Elise, her mind racing to save Tanya and protect her daughter, believing the riots and leaked recording had bought her time. Tanya's release came hours later, a miracle orchestrated by activists who'd pressured the DA, and Amara, reuniting with her sister in a hospital lot, wept, thinking she'd clawed back her family from Gaines's grip. Tanya, gaunt but alive, hugged her, whispering they'd fight together, and Amara felt a fleeting victory, her heart daring to hope as she planned to visit Elise. But Gaines, a shadow who never relented, had one more blow, his malice a fire that consumed everything. As Amara and Tanya drove to a new hideout, a text from an unknown number revealed Gaines had hacked her phone, leaking her location to his operatives, a betrayal of her last sanctuary. Before she could react, a roar split the night, a firebomb crashing into their safe house 8 miles from downtown, the duplex erupting in flames, its windows shattering like gunfire. Amara swerved the car, her arms screaming with pain, and floored, it escaping as the inferno swallowed the house, its heat searing her skin through the open window. Firefighters arrived, but their hoses moved slowly, one muttering she'd brought this on herself, their apathy a mirror of the system's disdain for her as a black woman defying its rules. She and Tanya hid in a church basement 3 miles away, the 90-degree air heavy with soot. Amara's body bruised, her arm bleeding again, her family fractured by Elise's burns and Tanya's trauma. The diner trap had stolen her freedom, the arrest her dignity, Elise's attack her heart, and the firebomb her safety, each blow tied to Gaines's hatred for her race and her fight. The leaked recording, her momentary triumph, was dust in the face of Gaines's escalation, his power choking Memphis like smoke. Amara held Tanya's hand, her sister's pulse a reminder of what she'd saved, and opened her phone, the cracked screen showing Elise's hospital photo, her daughter's bandaged face, a call to keep going. She'd lost her bench, her name, her home but not her will, forged in a lifetime of battling racism's weight. Gaines's hack meant nowhere was safe, but Amara, a judge without a courtroom, would find a way to free Elise, expose the Union, and bury Holt, even if it meant becoming a fugitive. The church's stained glass glowed faintly, a beacon in the dark, but Gaines's shadow loomed, his next strike a mystery that could burn everything she had left. Comment number 1. If you're furious at Gaines's trap crushing Amara's fight for truth, and hit that like and subscribe to see if she can rise from these ashes. Will Amara outrun Gaines's manhunt to save her daughter, or has his firebomb lit a fuse she can't escape? Amara Wells crouched in a Memphis church basement, the faint glow of stained glass her only light, her arm still stinging from the pipe bomb's shrapnel, her sister Tanya shivering beside her, the firebombing of their safe house a fresh scar. In the 90-degree night air thick with the scent of damp stone. Elise's dorm arson, leaving her daughter hospitalized 400 miles away, and Gaines's hack of her phone had made Amara a fugitive, her face plastered on every newsstand, granted a bioterrorist after the riots sparked by her leaked diner recording, now at 2 million views. Tanya's rescue was a fragile victory, but Gaines's shadow loomed, his operatives hunting her through a city that once called her judge. She ditched her phone, using a burner to text activists, their replies sparse but pointing to Jamal Tate, a 20-something hacker who'd exposed police corruption before vanishing underground. Amara met him in a shuttered bar 3 miles from downtown, its air heavy with stale beer and 95-degree heat, Jamal's dreadlocks framing a face lit by his laptop's glow. He showed her encrypted files linking Gaines to a private prison. Firm, a machine profiting from black inmates locked up on flimsy charges, Holt's brutality feeding its pipeline. The files detailed a $50 million deal to expand the firm's reach, Gaines skimming profits while black neighborhoods burned. Amara's breath caught, her fingers itching to expose this, believing it could free Elise, save Tanya, and bury Gaines's empire. Jamal, his voice sharp with defiance, proposed crashing a prison firm gala, a glitzy event 10 miles away where Gaines would schmooze investors, a chance to broadcast his scheme live. Amara, her judge's robe a memory, agreed, her heart pounding with the risk, thinking this could shift the war she'd been losing since Holt's courtroom assault. She dyed her hair black, donning a stolen reporter's badge, her pulse racing as she slipped into the gala's marble hall, chandeliers casting light on suits and gowns, the air thick with champagne and 90-degree arrogance. Jamal posing. As tech support rigged a live stream, and Amara, mic hidden in her blazer, cornered a firm exec, her questions sharp, coaxing a slip about Gaines's cut. She hit broadcast, her voice steady, detailing the prison deal to 1 million viewers, the gala's screens flashing her evidence, gasps rippling through the crowd. Amara thought she'd won. Her truth, a blade cutting Gaines's lies. The feds, surely watching as hashtags like Kabasin expose Gaines trended. But Gaines, a viper who thrived on control, had eyes everywhere, and security swarmed, their radios crackling with her name, a fugitive they'd been hunting since the firebomb. Amara ran, her heels slipping on polished floors, dodging guards through a service exit. The 95-degree night swallowing her as she sprinted into Memphis's underbelly, a maze of alleys and pawn shops. Sirens wailed, a chopper's spotlight, slicing the dark, and she dove into a dumpster, its stench choking her until the pursuit faded. Thinking she'd escaped, she swam across a muddy creek, the Mississippi River's current tugging at her, emerging soaked but alive 2 miles downstream, her burner buzzing with Jamal's text. The broadcast had sparked federal scrutiny, with DOJ leaks hinting at raids. Amara, shivering in a stolen jacket, believed she'd turned the tide, that Elise might heal, Tanya might breathe free, and Gaines's empire might crack. She found a payphone, calling Elise's hospital, her daughter's weak voice a lifeline, promising she'd visit soon. But Gaines, a man who turned setbacks into slaughter, struck with a cruelty that dwarfed her worst fears. News alerts flooded her burner, reporting a poison in a black community's water supply, a toxin traced to a treatment plant 5 miles from her old courtroom, with 50 residents, mostly black, hospitalized, vomiting blood, their anguish pinned on Amara's riots. Gaines's media allies spun her as a bioterrorist, her gala broadcast twisted into incitement, her face on billboards with the word terrorist in red. Amara's knees buckled, her mind reeling at the scale of his evil, each sickened child a weight on her soul. The racism of targeting black waterlines a gut punch that echoed Holt's slurs. She stumbled to a library, using a public computer to check the news, her hands shaking as she saw protests turning against her. Marchers who'd once chanted her name now burning her effigy, misled by Gaines's lies. Thinking she'd hit rock bottom, she called Elise's college 400 miles north, hoping for good news. But the dean's voice was cold. Elise's scholarship, her ticket to Howard, had been revoked, tied to donors in Gaines's pocket, citing security risks from Amara's crimes. Amara's throat closed, her daughter's future, already scarred by burns, now stolen. The racism of the decision a blade through her heart. She sank onto a bench, the 90-degree air heavy with exhaust, her body bruised, her arm throbbing, her family fractured by Elise's pain and Tanya's trauma. The gala's broadcast, her fleeting triumph, was ashes in Gaines's shadow, his poisoning a war crime that made her firebomb seem small, his donor's reach a reminder that no part of her life was safe. Tanya, huddled beside her, whispered. They'd fight on, but Amara's eyes burned, picturing Elise's bandaged face, the poisoned children, the billboards branding her a monster. The church basement, their last refuge, felt like a tomb, but Amara, a black woman who'd faced racism's weight her whole life, refused to break. She'd lost her bench, her name, her home, her daughter's dreams, but not her fire. kindled by every slur, every lie, every blow. Gaines's hack meant she was hunted. His poison meant she was hated. But she'd find a way to reach Elise, save those children, and bury the prison firm, even if it meant running forever. She slipped into the night, the river's murmur a faint pulse, knowing Gaines's next strike would be deadlier, his hatred for her defiance a flame that burned hotter with each step she took. Amara Wells stood in a Memphis warehouse, the air thick with dust and 90-degree heat, her arm scarred from shrapnel, her heart heavy with the poison coursing through a black community's water, 50 souls sickened by Chief Prosecutor Ronald. Gaines's bioterrorism, pinned on her as a fugitive, branded a terrorist across billboards 5 miles from her old courtroom. Elise's burned dorm and revoked scholarship, Tanya's fragile freedom after her kidnapping, and the gala's fleeting triumph, now at 3 million views, were ashes under Gaines's lies. But Amara, a black judge stripped of her robe, refused to break. She ditched the church basement, too exposed after the firebomb, and rallied with activists in this crumbling hideout, their faces lit by a single bulb, planning a protest to parade water-poisoning victims before City Hall, a desperate bid to shame the governor into action. Tanya, her eyes hollow but fierce, stitched Amara's arm with a nurse's precision, whispering they'd fight for Elise, 400 miles away, her burns healing, but her dreams gutted. Jamal Tate, the hacker who'd risked all at the gala, hacked hospital records, proving the toxin's source, his laptop a lifeline as he vowed to stand with Amara, his dreadlocks swaying with each nod. She believed in him, his defiance a mirror of her own, and they choreographed the protest, scheduling it for dawn 2 days later, a march to show Memphis the human cost of Gaines's prison firm, which thrived on black pain. Amara spent 48 hours rallying victims' families, her voice hoarse but unbroken, visiting a mother whose son, a 12-year-old, lay in a coma, his IV drip a silent accusation of Gaines's evil. The mother's tears soaked Amara's shoulder, fueling her to make the protest a beacon, thinking it could force federal raids and free her from the manhunt that hunted her like prey. Dawn broke, the 95-degree air heavy with humidity, as 1,000 marchers gathered outside City Hall, a sea of black and brown faces holding photos of poisoned loved ones, Amara at the front, her megaphone crackling as she named Gaines. Holt and the firm, each word a gavel strike. The governor, cornered by cameras, promised an investigation, his words a lifeline, and Amara's chest swelled, believing she'd finally cracked the system's armor, that Elise might see justice, Tanya might breathe free, and the sick might heal. Protesters cheered, their signs a forest of hope, and she thought she'd turned the tide, her fugitive status a badge of courage rather than shame. But trust, like a cracked foundation, crumbles under pressure, and Jamal, bribed by Gaines's promise of safety for his own family, had leaked the protest's route, a betrayal that cut deeper than Lena's. As the march reached a downtown square, a militia loyal to Gaines, their faces masked, roared in on trucks, firing tear gas and rubber bullets, the air choking with acrid smoke as screams replaced chants. Amara grabbed Tanya, diving behind a statue quadrupole, her eyes burning, her arm throbbing as bullets pinged off stone, the crowd scattering like leaves in a storm. She dragged Tanya through an alley, her lungs searing, escaping as police, Gaines's puppets, kettled protesters, batons swinging. Thinking she'd survived, Amara hid in a barbershop 4 miles away, its blinds drawn, and leaked proof of Jamal's betrayal, texts showing his deal with Gaines, to a blog now at 1 million followers. The post exploded, hashtags like "Hunk betrayed by Gaines" trending, but Gaines, a predator who fed on chaos, struck back with a venom that rewrote history. Her burner buzzed with alerts, a new deepfake video surging online, this one showing Amara planning the water poisoning, her face eerily perfect, her voice confessing to sabotage to punish Memphis. The video hit 5 million views. In hours, comments spewing racial venom, calling her a plague on the city, her blackness a weapon in their eyes. Even the mother she'd comforted texted, her words cold, asking if Amara had poisoned her son, the betrayal a knife through her heart. Protesters turned, some burning her flyers, their trust shattered by Gaines's lie. The governor's promise now a hollow echo. Amara's throat closed, her reflection in the barbershop's mirror a stranger, her fight for justice twisted into terrorism. As she planned to flee, a call from the DA's office froze her. Tanya, who'd marched beside her, was arrested for aiding a terrorist, facing life in prison, Gaines's operatives claiming she'd funded Amara's attacks. Amara's scream caught in her chest, her sister's freedom, won after kidnapping, now stolen again, the racism of the charge a gut punch, targeting Tanya for her blood tie to a black woman who dared defy. She called a lawyer friend, her voice breaking, but the case was airtight, Gaines's influence sealing Tanya's fate. Thinking she'd hit rock bottom, Amara slipped into a vigil for the poisoned, a park 2 miles away, hoping to honor the victims and clear her name. She spoke softly, her hood up, naming the 50 sick, but a crack split the air, a sniper's bullet clipping her shoulder, the 90-degree night exploding with screams as she dove into bushes, blood soaking her sleeve. The shooter vanished, but police swarmed, their radios barking her name, and Amara crawled through mud, escaping to a storm drain, her shoulder screaming, her breath ragged. At a clinic 3 miles away, a nurse stitched her up, no questions asked, but her burner lit up with a final blow. Gaines had rigged her courtroom's security footage, a doctored clip now viral, showing Amara provoking Holt's assault. Her gavel raised like a weapon, flipping the truth of his slurs and fists. The video hit 10 million views, anchors calling her the aggressor, the racism of the edit erasing her as a victim, making her black defiance the crime. Amara's knees buckled, her body bruised, her shoulder bleeding, her family fractured by Tanya's cell and Elise's burns. The protests' promise her fleeting victory was dust in Gaines's shadow, his militia, deepfake, and sniper a war that dwarfed her firebomb. She hid in the drain, the drip of water a faint pulse, Tanya's arrest a weight, Elise's pain a fire, the poisoned children a chain. Yet Amara, forged in racism's crucible, refused to yield, her will a flame no sniper could douse. She'd lost her bench, her name, her sister, but not her truth, and she'd fight for Tanya, Elise, and Memphis even if it meant becoming a ghost. Comment number 1 if you're sickened by Gaines's deepfake, turning Amara's justice into a lie, and hit that like and subscribe to see her claw back from this betrayal. Can Amara rally the broken to expose Gaines's militia, or will his sniper's aim find her heart next time? Amara Wells limped through a Memphis storm drain, her shoulder seeping blood from a sniper's bullet, the damp air heavy with mildew and 90-degree heat, her sister Tanya locked in a cell facing life for aiding a terrorist, her daughter. Police fighting burns 400 miles away, and a doctored courtroom video, now at 12 million views, framing her as the villain who provoked Officer Daniel Holt's racist assault. The protests' betrayal, Jamal's sellout, and Gaines's militia had left her a fugitive, hunted across a city poisoned by Chief Prosecutor Ronald Gaines's lies, his water toxin sickening 60 black residents, their pain pinned on her. Hiding in a laundromat's backroom 3 miles from downtown, Amara patched her wound with stolen gauze, her hands shaking as she scrolled a burner phone, finding a tip from a rogue clerk. Gaines's office held records of bribed judges, proof to bury his prison firm empire. She planned a break-in, her judge's instincts sharpened by desperation, believing those files could free Tanya, clear her name, and save Elise's future. She slipped into a janitor's uniform, her face shadowed by a cap, and breached Gaines's skyscraper at midnight, the 95-degree air thick with the hum of AC units as she pried open a vent, crawling through ducts that reeked of dust. Her heart pounded, each creak a threat, but she reached his office, a mahogany fortress 10 stories up, and planted tiny cameras, their lenses catching Gaines on a call, boasting of payoffs to 3 circuit judges to shield his firm. Amara's breath hitched, her fingers trembling as she synced the footage to a cloud. The evidence a gavel in her hands, a chance to swing back at the system that had suspended her, arrested her, and poisoned her people. She escaped through a fire escape, the city's skyline a jagged scar against the moon, and leaked the footage to a blog, now at 2 million followers, the video exploding to 1 million views by dawn, sparking a DOJ probe that froze Gaines's accounts. Amara, holed up in a motel 6 miles away, felt a rush, believing she'd cracked his empire, that Tanya might walk free, Elise might heal, and the 60 sick might find justice. She called Elise's hospital, her daughter's voice. Faint but alive, a spark in the dark, and for a moment Amara thought she'd won. The Fed's scrutiny at dawn after months of night. But Gaines, a hydra who grew deadlier with each wound, struck with a savagery that dwarfed her worst nightmares. Her burner buzzed with alerts, a breaking news report shaking her core. A bomb had ripped through a black church 2 miles from city. All its stained glass shattered. Its pews ash, a pastor, a father of 3, killed in the blast, his body found under rubble. The media, Gaines's puppets, blamed Amara's radicalism, claiming her footage incited the attack, their headlines screaming her name as national news anchors debated her terrorist ties on live TV, the racism of their narrative a blade through her soul. The death toll rose, 5 injured, the pastor's face plastered on screens, his community's grief twisted to vilify Amara, a black woman whose fight for truth was now a death sentence. She sank onto the motel's sagging bed, the 90-degree, air choking her, her shoulder throbbing, her mind replaying the pastor's sermons she'd heard as a girl, his voice a call to hope, now silenced by Gaines's hate. Thinking she'd escaped, she slipped to a safe house 8 miles away, a condemned apartment where she planned to track Gaines's next move, believing the DOJ's probe would shield her. She rigged a radio to scan police chatter, its static, a lifeline, and heard a coded message about a private club, a hideout where Gaines was rumored to regroup. Amara, her judge's robe a ghost, posed as a caterer, her hair tucked under a wig, and infiltrated the club, a velvet-draped Den 12, miles from downtown, the air thick with cigar smoke and 95-degree arrogance. She planted a mic under a table, her hands steady despite her racing pulse, capturing Gaines's voice, low and venomous, detailing his plan to flee to a Caribbean estate, his firm's profits wired offshore. Amara's heart leapt, the recording, a noose for his neck, and she leaked it from a library computer, the audio hitting 1 million views with hashtags like Gaines flees trending. But Gaines, a man who turned traps into triumphs, had baited her, his guards waiting in the club's shadows. They grabbed her, their fists slamming her ribs, her body crumpling as they dragged her to a back room, her mic smashed, her wig torn off. She fought, her nails clawing a guard's face, and broke free, sprinting through a kitchen, pots clattering as she dove into an alley, the 90-degree night swallowing her gasps. Thinking she'd survived, she called Elise's hospital, her voice shaking only to learn the worst. Elise had been kidnapped from her ward, Gaines's men leaving a note demanding Amara confess to terrorism, or her daughter would die. Her scream echoed in the alley, her knees hitting pavement, the image of Elise burned and now stolen, shattering her. She called Tanya's lawyer, learning her sister's prison was on lockdown, Gaines's allies ensuring no contact, but a new blow landed. The hospital where Tanya had worked, a lifeline for Black Memphis, was shut down, its board citing financial strain from Gaines's donors, leaving thousands without care, Tanya now homeless if freed. Amara's chest tightened, the 90-degree air of vice, her body bruised, her shoulder bleeding, her family fractured by Elise's absence and Tanya's cell. The DOJ probe, her fleeting victory, was dust in Gaines's shadow, his church bombing, kidnapping and hospital closure, a genocide that dwarfed his poison. She hid in a pawn shop's attic, the hum of neon signs below a faint pulse, Elise's hospital photo on her burner, a call to keep going. The pastor's death, the hospital's fall, the club's beating. They were Gaines's war on her blackness, but Amara, forged in racism's fire, refused to break. She'd lost her bench, her name, her daughter, but not her will, and she'd save Elise, free Tanya, and bury Gaines, even if it meant drowning in his hate. The attic's shadows closed in, Gaines's next strike a spectre, his reach a noose tightening with each breath she took. Amara Wells huddled in a Memphis pawnshop attic, the neon hum below her only light, her ribs bruised from a beating in Gaines's private club, her daughter Elise kidnapped from her hospital bed 400 miles away, and the Black Hospital, where her sister Tanya once worked, now shuttered by Chief Prosecutor Ronald Gaines's donors, leaving thousands without care in a city reeling from his church bombing that killed a pastor and his water poisoning that sickened 60 black souls. The DOJ probe sparked by her leaked footage, now at 2 million views, was a fading ember, drowned by Gaines's lies branding her a terrorist, her name a curse on Memphis's lips after a doctored video flipped her courtroom assault by Officer Daniel Holt into her crime. Tanya languished in prison, facing life for aiding Amara, a fugitive hunted through alleys, her shoulder wound seeping under a makeshift bandage in the 90-degree night air thick with dust. A tip from a rogue cop pointed her to Gaines's compound, a fortified estate 15 miles from downtown, rumored to hold files on his voter suppression scheme, a plot to rig elections to protect his prison firm's profits from black suffering. Amara, her judge's resolve a flickering flame, disguised herself as a security guard, her stolen uniform tight, her face smeared with dirt to mask her identity, and slipped past the compound's gates, the 95-degree heat slicking her skin as dogs barked in the distance. Her heart hammered, each step a gamble, but she breached a basement office, its steel cabinets yielding folders detailing Gaines's bribes to poll workers, slashing black voter turnout by 30% in 3 counties. Her fingers trembled. The papers, a lifeline to free Elise, save Tanya, and expose the racism that fueled Gaines's empire, a system that had suspended her, burned her daughter's dorm, and bombed a church. She snapped photos, uploading them to a blog now at 3 million followers, the files going viral by dawn, hitting 1 million views and sparking lawsuits from voting rights groups, their lawyers citing Amara's evidence in federal court. Amara escaped through a drainage ditch, thorns tearing her skin, believing she'd struck a mortal blow that the lawsuits might force Gaines to release Elise and crumble his hold on Memphis. She hid in a motel 7 miles away, its air heavy with mildew, and called Elise's hospital, clinging to hope. But the nurse's silence confirmed her daughter was still gone, Gaines's note demanding a terrorism confession haunting her. The sigh. Lawsuits swelled, trending hashtags like voter fraud Gaines flooding social media, and Amara, her ribs aching, thought she'd turned the tide, that Tanya might walk, the poisoned might heal, and her name might clear. But Gaines, a demon who thrived on ruin, countered with a ferocity that plunged her into an abyss. Her burner buzzed with alerts, a courthouse bomb threat rocking Memphis, the same building where she'd once wielded her gavel, now evacuated. As SWAT swarmed, the media blaming Amara's incitement, their anchors tying her voter files to terrorism. The threat, a hoax traced to Gaines's operatives, shut down the city, and Amara's motel TV flashed her face, now a national pariah, the racism of the narrative painting her black defiance as anarchy. She smashed the remote, her scream silent, the weight of 60 sick, a dead pastor, and Elise's absence crushing her. Thinking she'd hit rock bottom, she slipped to a safe house 9 miles away, a crumbling duplex where activists hid her, their eyes wary but loyal, and planned to regroup, believing Elise's rescue was near. The activists, led by a preacher named Keisha, stormed the DA's office, their protests forcing Amara's release on bail, a miracle born of their chants and the lawsuit's pressure. Amara, free but hunted, reunited with Keisha in a park, her ribs throbbing, her shoulder seeping, believing she was back in the fight that the feds might raid Gaines's firm and free her daughter. She hugged Keisha, the 90-degree dusk heavy with honeysuckle, daring to hope as she planned to visit Elise's hospital to find a trace of her girl. But Gaines, a shadow who turned hope to ash, unleashed a horror that dwarfed his bombing. News alerts flooded her burner, reporting an entire black neighborhood 2 miles from her old home, evicted overnight, 300 families homeless, their apartments razed for a safety project funded by Gaines's allies, the racism of the move a sledgehammer, displacing the same community poisoned by his water. The media, Gaines's puppets, blamed Amara's chaos, their headlines twisting her lawsuits into destruction, protesters who'd once marched for her now cursing her name, misled by his lies. Amara's knees buckled, her mind reeling. At the faces of those families, some she'd known as a judge, now sleeping in tents, their loss her fault in the public's eyes, Thinking she'd survived, she checked her burner for activist updates, but a final blow landed, a report that shook her core. A school's air system, serving a black district 3 miles from City Hall, had been poisoned. A toxin laced into vents, hospitalizing 40 children, their coughs and seizures pinned on Amara, a device at the scene bearing her name. The news showed kids on stretchers, parents wailing, and Amara's face on billboards now labeled child killer. The racism of the attack a gut punch, targeting black youth to bury her truth. She sank onto the duplex's floor, the 90-degree air of ice, her body bruised, her shoulder bleeding, her family fractured by Elise's kidnapping and Tanya's cell. The lawsuits, her fleeting victory, were dust in Gaines's shadow, his eviction and school poisoning a genocide that dwarfed his church bomb. She clutched her burner, its cracked screen showing a photo of Elise, her daughter's smile a call to keep going, but the children's cries, the homeless families, the pastor's blood, they were Gaines's war on her blackness, a war she'd fought since Holt's slurs. Amara, forged in racism's crucible, refused to break. Her will a spark no toxin could douse. She'd lost her bench, her name, her daughter, but not her fight, and she'd save Elise, free Tanya, and bury Gaines, even if it meant burning with him. The duplex's walls closed in, Gaines's next strike a spectre, his hatred a noose tightening with each breath. Comment number 1 if you're horrified by Gaines's school poisoning, framing Amara for his crimes. And hit that like and subscribe to see her rise from this abyss. Can Amara broadcast the truth to save her daughter, or will Gaines's lies bury her in a grave of his making? Amara Wells crouched in a Memphis warehouse, the air heavy with oil and 90-degree heat, her ribs bruised from a beating, her shoulder seeping blood from a sniper's graze, the cries of 40 poisoned black children and 300 evicted. Families echoing in her mind, Chief Prosecutor Ronald Gaines's latest atrocities, pinned on her as a fugitive, branded a child killer across billboards 10 miles from her old courtroom. Elise's kidnapping, Tanya's life sentence and the shuttered hospital were wounds that bled with every breath. But Amara, a black judge stripped of her gavel, clung to the voter suppression files she'd leaked, now at 3 million views, sparking lawsuits that shook Gaines's prison firm empire. Hiding with activists in this rusted sanctuary, she planned a pirate broadcast, a desperate gambit to air the files to millions, believing it could force Gaines to free Elise and crumble his hold on Memphis. She teamed with Keisha, the preacher who'd freed her on bail, and a tech-savvy activist named Malik, their faces grim but resolute as they rigged a hacked radio tower 5 miles away, its signal strong enough to hijack every station in the city. Amara's hands shook, her burner phone showing a photo of Elise, her daughter's bandaged face afire in her chest, urging her to risk everything. At midnight, under a 95-degree sky thick with stars, she climbed the tower's ladder, her ribs screaming and patched into the signal, her voice crackling over airwaves, detailing Gaines's voter bribes, naming his firm's profits from black suffering, her words a gavel striking truth. The broadcast reached 10 million listeners, social media erupting with Gaines exposed, and the FCC launched a probe, Gaines's stock plummeting as investors fled, his empire teetering. Amara descended, her heart pounding, believing she'd won, that Elise might be freed, Tanya might walk, and the poisoned children might heal. She hid in a safe house 7 miles away, a boarded-up gym where she called Elise's hospital, clinging to hope. But the nurse's silence confirmed her daughter was still gone. Gaines's confession demanded a noose around her neck. The probes. Headlines felt like dawn, and Amara, her ribs aching, thought she'd turned the tide, that her name might clear, her family might mend. But Gaines, a titan who turned victories to ash, struck with a savagery that shattered her world. As she joined a rally 2 miles from City Hall, 1,000 strong chanting her evidence, a car bomb detonated, its roar swallowing the 90-degree dusk, shrapnel tearing through the crowd. Amara diving behind a barricade, her ears ringing, her body grazed by debris. 20 were injured, 3 critically, and Amara, crawling through smoke, pulled a bleeding activist to safety, her hands slick with blood, her mind reeling at the carnage, the racism of targeting a black rally, a gut punch that echoed Holt's slurs. The media, Gaines's puppets, blamed her incitement, their anchors calling her a warlord. The blast twisted into her crime, billboards now screaming, "Kill a judge." Amara's chest tightened, the weight of 60 sick. 300 homeless and now 20 wounded crushing her, her broadcast's triumph drowned by Gaines's terror. Thinking she'd survived, she slipped to a clinic 4 miles away. A nurse stitching her grazes, but her burner buzzed with a new blow. Gaines had leaked her juvenile record, a sealed file from 30 years ago when she'd shoplifted at 15, now twisted to paint her as a lifelong criminal mastermind. The racism of the leak weaponizing her black youth against her. The story hit every news cycle. Allies like Malik texting doubts, their trust fraying. Protesters who'd chanted her name now wavering, misled by Gaines's lies. Amara's throat closed, her reflection in the clinic's window a stranger, her fight for justice a noose tightening with each headline. She planned to track Gaines, her burner tracing his movements to a private airstrip 20 miles from downtown, rumored as his escape route. She hitched a ride, her ribs throbbing, and posed as a mechanic, her cap low, sneaking into a hangar where Gaines boarded a jet, his voice boasting of wired millions, her hidden camera catching every word. Her heart leapt, the footage a spear, to his heart, and she leaked it from a truck stop computer, the video hitting 2 million views with hashtags like #Gaines Flees trending. But Gaines, a predator who baited traps, had anticipated her. His mercenaries swarming the hangar, their boots echoing as they doused it with acid, the fumes choking her lungs. Amara dove through a vent, her skin burning, and escaped into a cornfield. The 90-degree night swallowing her gasps, her body a map of scars. Thinking she'd outrun him, she checked her burner, hoping for news of Elise, but a call from Tanya's lawyer landed the final blow. Tanya had been murdered in prison, her death staged as a suicide, a shank wound to her neck, Gaines's allies ensuring no autopsy. Amara's scream tore through the field, her knees hitting dirt, Tanya's laughter her gumbo, her strength gone, the racism of her death a sledgehammer, punishing Amara's blood tie to a black woman who defied. She called Keisha, her voice. Breaking, learning Gaines's donors had sued her family into bankruptcy, their home, Tanya's apartment, Elise's tuition, all seized, leaving nothing but debt. Amara sank into the soil, the 90-degree air a tomb. Her body broken, her family shattered by Elise's absence and Tanya's blood. The broadcast's triumph, her fleeting victory, was dust in Gaines's shadow, his car bomb, leak, murder, and bankruptcy a holocaust that dwarfed his school poisoning. She clutched her burner, its cracked screen showing Tanya's photo, her sister's smile a call to keep going, but the wounded rally, the poisoned children, the homeless families, they were Gaines's war on her blackness, a war she'd fought since Holt's fists. Amara, forged in racism's crucible, refused to break, her will a spark no acid could douse. She'd lost her bench, her name, her sister, but not her fight, and she'd save Elise, bury Gaines, and honor Tanya, even if it meant burning with him. The cornfield's shadows closed in, Gaines's next strike a spectre, his hatred a blade sharpening with each step she took. Amara Wells staggered through a Memphis cornfield, the 90-degree night air thick with the scent of earth and grief. Her ribs cracked from a hangar acid attack, her sister Tanya's prison murder a fresh wound, her daughter Elise still kidnapped, and her family bankrupted by Chief Prosecutor Ronald Gaines's donors, who'd turned her fight for justice into a terrorist's legacy across billboards 15 miles from her old courtroom. The pirate broadcast, now at 12 million views, had sparked an FCC probe, but Gaines's car bomb, juvenile record leak, and Tanya's staged suicide had buried Amara's truth, her name synonymous with chaos after poisoning 60 black residents, evicting 300 families and bombing a church. Hiding in a mechanic's garage 8 miles away, her shoulder seeping blood, Amara learned Gaines's trial for voter suppression was set for dawn, a federal courthouse where her leaked files had forced charges, her last chance to face him and free Elise. She dyed her hair blonde, donning a stolen press badge, her heart a drumbeat as she slipped into the courthouse, its marble halls echoing with murmurs, the 95-degree morning heavy with tension. The gallery was packed, cameras rolling, And Amara, her ribs screaming, stood, her voice cutting through the judge's opening, broadcasting Gaines's confession from the airstrip on her burner phone, streamed live to 5 million viewers, detailing his prison firm's profits from black suffering, his bribes, his bombs. The courtroom erupted, Gaines's face ashen, the judge banging her gavel, but Amara kept speaking, naming Holt's slurs, Tanya's blood, Elise's burns, her words a verdict that shook the rafters. The feds arrested Gaines, his cuffs snapping shut, and Amara, hailed as a hero by activists online, believed she'd won, that Elise would be freed, the poisoned would heal, and her name would clear. She slipped out, her pulse racing, hiding. In a diner 4 miles away, its air thick with grease, calling Elise's hospital, hoping for news, her heart daring to lift as hashtags like Gaines guilty trended. But Gaines, a hydra who thrived on chaos, refused to fall. His next strike a cataclysm that dwarfed his murder of Tanya. Her burner buzzed with alerts, a prison riot breaking Gaines free, his loyalists storming the jail, their guns blazing, guards overwhelmed as he vanished into the night, a breakout planned before his trial. The news showed burning cells, 3 guards dead, and Gaines's face on every screen, his escape pinned on Amara's incitement, the racism of the narrative, twisting her broadcast into anarchy's spark. Protesters who'd cheered her turned, some looting, misled by Gaines's lies, and Amara's chest tightened, the weight of 60 sick, 300 homeless, a dead pastor, and now 3 guards crushing her. Thinking she'd hit rock bottom, she slipped to a safe house 6 miles away, a condemned bakery where Keisha hid her, their eyes locked on a radio reporting chaos. The radio crackled with worse. Gaines's militia had firebombed black businesses across Memphis, 5 shops ash, their owners, Amara's old neighbors, ruined, the media blaming her radicalism, the racism of targeting black livelihoods a sledgehammer. As Amara planned to regroup, a call from Elise's college 400 miles north landed the cruelest blow. Elise had been shot during the riots, a bullet to her leg, her condition critical, the hospital swarmed by Gaines's allies who'd staged the chaos to hit Amara's heart. Amara's scream tore through the bakery, her knees hitting the flour-dusted floor, Elise's laughter, her dreams of law school now bleeding out, the racism of the attack a gut punch, punishing her black daughter for her mother's defiance. She called the hospital, her voice breaking. Learning Elise clung to life, but police, Gaines's puppets, guarded her room, calling her a suspect in the riots, their bias a noose around Amara's hope. Thinking she'd survived, Amara uncovered a lead. Gaines's plan to rig a gubernatorial election, a scheme to install a puppet to protect his firm, hidden in his campaign office 12 miles away. She posed as a volunteer, her blonde wig tight, her ribs throbbing, and infiltrated the office, its air heavy with coffee and 90-degree arrogance, slipping into a server room to steal data. But Gaines, a predator who baited traps, had anticipated her, his hackers locking the door, the room's ceiling groaning as pipes burst, water flooding the basement, a trap to drown her. Amara's lungs burned, her shoulders seeping as she clawed at a vent, the 90-degree deluge rising to her chest, her body trapped in a concrete coffin. She pried the vent open, her nails splitting, and swam through, collapsing in an alley, her body a map of scars, her breath ragged. Thinking she'd escaped, she checked her burner, hoping for Elise's update, but a final blow landed. Gaines's allies had expunged her judicial record, erasing her 20-year career, barring her from the bench forever. The racism of the move a blade, stripping her black legacy to bury her truth. Amara sank into the alley's mud, the 90-degree air a tomb, her body broken, her family shattered by Elise's bullet and Tanya's blood. The trial's triumph, her fleeting victory, was dust in Gaines's shadow, his prison break, firebombs, shooting and expungement, a holocaust that dwarfed his car bomb. She clutched her burner, its cracked screen showing Elise's photo, her daughter's smile a call to keep going. But the burning shops, the poisoned children, the homeless families, they were Gaines's war on her blackness, a war she'd fought since Holt's fists. Amara, forged in racism's crucible, refused to break, her will a spark no flood could douse. She'd lost her bench, her name, her daughter's safety, but not her fight, and she'd save Elise, honor Tanya, and bury Gaines, even if it meant drowning with him. The alley's shadows closed in, Gaines's neck strike a spectre, his hatred a blade sharpening with each step she took. Amara Wells crouched in a Memphis alley, the 90-degree night air thick with the stench of wet asphalt, her ribs cracked from a beating, her shoulder seeping blood from a sniper's graze. Her daughter Elise, fighting for life, 400. Miles away with a bullet in her leg, her sister Tanya dead in a prison cell, and her judicial record erased, a 20-year career as a black judge obliterated by Chief Prosecutor Ronald Gaines's allies, who'd branded her a terrorist across billboards 20 miles from her old courtroom. The prison break that freed Gaines, the firebombed black businesses, and the flooding basement trap had shattered her, but Amara, forged in the crucible of racism since Officer Daniel Holt's courtroom assault, clung to the voter suppression. Files she'd stolen, now at 4 million views, their lawsuits stalling Gaines's gubernatorial election rigging. Hiding in a mechanic's shed 5 miles from downtown, her body a map of scars, she hacked a radio signal with Keisha's help, a preacher turned warrior leaking proof of Gaines's election plot to a blog, the evidence detailing bribes to slash black votes by 40%, hitting 5 million views by dawn and derailing his puppet candidate, the governor's race thrown into chaos. Amara's heart pounded, her burner phone glowing with Elise's photo, believing this could force Gaines to free her daughter and end his war on Memphis, where 60 poisoned residents, 300 evicted families, and 5 burned shops bore his mark. She traced Gaines to a fortified mansion 15 miles from the river, a stone fortress where he'd fled after his escape, and Amara, her judge's resolve a dying ember, planned a raid, knowing Elise was inside, held hostage by a man who'd killed Tanya, bombed a church and poisoned children. She stole a guard's uniform, her blonde wig tight, and slipped past razor wire, the 95-degree air slicking her skin as dogs howled, her ribs screaming with each step. The mansion's halls gleamed with marble, chandeliers casting shadows, and Amara, her pulse a drumbeat, found a locked room, Elise's muffled cries seeping through. Gaines, a predator who thrived on despair, was live-streaming his justice, his voice booming to 1 million viewers, taunting Amara, a black woman who dared defy him, with Elise bound, her leg bandaged but bleeding. Amara's throat closed, her daughter's eyes wide with fear, a fire in her chest, and she smashed the door with a fire extinguisher, her shoulder seeping as she faced Gaines, his gun trained on Elise, his militia circling, their slurs echoing Holt's courtroom hate. The livestream hit 2 million views, the world watching as Amara, unarmed but unyielding, lunged at a guard, wrenching his rifle, her ribs cracking under a blow, but firing a warning shot that froze the room. She screamed for Elise to run, her daughter limping free as Amara tackled Gaines, her nails digging into his wrist, disarming him, his gun skidding across the floor. The militia charged, but Amara, fueled by Tanya's blood, Elise's pain, and 66 souls, fought like a cornered lion, her fists and elbows a blur, knocking 2 men down, her body a shield as she dragged Gaines to a window, her burner, streaming his defeat live, his face bloodied, his confession spilling. He'd bribed, bombed, and killed to protect his firm, his hatred for Amara's black defiance the fuel. The video hit 10 million views, hashtags like Charles Gaines Falls trending. And federal agents, tipped by Keisha, stormed the mansion, their boots echoing as they cuffed Gaines, his militia scattering, the live stream a verdict that shook the nation. Amara collapsed, her ribs shattered, her shoulder gushing. But Elise, safe in an agent's arms, was her dawn, the feds promising reforms to dismantle Gaines's firm, the poisoned finding care, the evicted offered homes. She believed she'd won, her truth a gavel that had finally struck, Tanya's death avenged, Elise's life spared, and Holt's slurs silenced. Agents drove her to a safe house 10 miles away, a brick bungalow where she hugged Elise, her daughters, tears soaking her, the 90-degree air heavy with relief. But as she sifted through Gaines's seized files, a hidden drive revealed a truth that chilled her blood. A nationwide network of racist officials tied to Gaines, still active, their names in Congress, courts, and police, a web-rigging votes, and crushing black lives untouched by his arrest. The drive held a letter from Gaines, scrawled before his capture. "They'll finish you." Hamara's breath caught. The 95-degree room a vice, her victory bittersweet. The network a shadow dwarfing Gaines's church bomb, his poison, his bombs. Elise clung to her, alive but scarred, her leg a limp, and Amara, her body broken, her family fractured by Tanya's grave, faced a new war, the racism of the network a hydra she'd only wounded. The Fed's reforms, her fleeting triumph, were dust in this shadow. Gaines's letter a prophecy of battles to come. She hid the drive, her hands trembling, knowing the network's reach could strike Elise, the 60 sick, the 300. Homeless, all she'd fought for. The bungalow's walls closed in, but Amara, a black woman who'd faced racism's weight since Holt's fists, refused to break, her will a spark no letter could douse. She'd lost her bench, her name, her sister, but not her fight, and she'd save Elise, honor Tanya, and expose the network, even if it meant burning with it. The mansion's echo lingered, Gaines's cuffs a false end, his network a blade sharpening. In the dark, its next strike a spectre she couldn't outrun. Amara Wells stood on the steps of a rebuilt Memphis courthouse, its marble gleaming under a 90-degree sun, her ribs still aching from a mansion brawl, her shoulder scarred from a sniper's bullet, her daughter Elise beside her, limping from a riot's gunshot, the ghost of her sister Tanya murdered in prison, a weight in her chest and her judicial career erased by Chief Prosecutor Ronald Gaines's allies, who'd branded her a terrorist for exposing his empire of racism. The mansion raid, where she'd disarmed Gaines and broadcast his confession to 10 million viewers, had led to his arrest, sparking reforms that aided 60 poisoned black residents, rehoused 300 evicted families, and reopened a shuttered hospital. But the hidden drive she'd found, revealing a nationwide network of racist officials, loomed like a storm, its letter from Gaines, "They'll finish you," a chilling prophecy. The courthouse steps buzzed with 1,000 supporters, their signs a forest of hope, chanting Amara's name as she gripped a microphone, her voice steady but raw, urging Memphis to dismantle systemic racism, to root out the corruption that fueled Officer Daniel Holt's slurs, Gaines's bombs, and a network that rigged votes to crush black lives. She spoke of Tanya's laughter, Elise's courage, and the poisoned children, her words a gavel striking truth, each sentence a call to rise against a system that had suspended her, burned her daughter's dorm, and killed a pastor. The crowd roared, phones filming, the speech streaming to 15 million viewers, hashtags like Amara Fights trending, and Amara, her black blazer crisp despite the 95-degree heat, felt their energy, believing her battle had ignited. A national fire, that the reforms might hold, that Elise might heal, and Tanya's death might mean something. She hugged Elise, her daughter's eyes bright despite the limp, and stepped down, the crowd parting like a sea, their cheers a shield against the pain of a bankrupt family, a lost bench, and a city scarred by Gaines's war. Back at a safe house, 8 miles away, a brick cottage where Keisha brewed coffee. Amara mentored young black lawyers, their notebooks open, her wisdom a lifeline, thinking she'd found a new purpose, a way to rebuild from the ashes of her career. She taught them to question, to fight, to see the law as a tool for justice, not a chain, her voice steady as she recounted her fight, from Holt's fists to Gaines's network, each scar a lesson. Elise, recovering but haunted, sketched murals of their struggle, her art a beacon, and Amara, watching her daughter's pencil move, dared to hope they'd mend, that Memphis might heal, that the network might stay buried. The safe house's air, thick with coffee and 90-degree warmth, felt like home, and Amara, her ribs less tender, her shoulder a faint ache, believed the worst was over, that her speech had shifted the tide, that the Fed's reforms would hold the line. But hope, like glass, shatters under truth, and the hidden drive tucked in her pocket held a secret that flipped her victory into a haunting challenge. Late that night, as Elise slept, Amara opened the drive, its files revealing a new threat. A senator, a name in Gaines's network, planning to undo her reforms, his campaign tied to laws slashing black voting rights by 50%, a shadow, empire untouched by Gaines's cuffs. The senator's face, smug on a news clip, flashed on her burner, his speeches cloaked in coded racism, a direct line to the network's heart, its tendrils in Congress, courts and police, a hydra that had poisoned 60, evicted 300 and burned 5 shops to keep black voices silent. Amara's breath caught, her hands trembling. The 90-degree room of ice, the senator's plan a blade sharper than Gaines's letter, threatening Elise's future, the poisoned's care, the evicted's homes, the audience, expecting her to retire, to rest after Gaines's fall, watched her stand, her eyes burning, the weight of Tanya's grave, Elise's scars, and a million black lives pushing her forward. She uncovered a lead on the senator, a meeting in a city 200 miles away, and slipped into her car, the 95-degree night swallowing her, her burner loaded with the drive's files, her heart a drumbeat of defiance. The speech's triumph, now at 20 million views, was a spark. But the senator's shadow loomed, a war Gaines had started, his network a machine that never stopped. Amara drove, the Memphis skyline fading, her hands gripping the wheel, the road a ribbon of purpose. Her mind replaying the courthouse steps, the crowd's roar, Elise's sketch, Tanya's laugh. She'd lost her bench, her sister, her name, but not her fight. And she'd expose the senator, protect the reforms, and honor the 60, the 300, the 5, even if it meant chasing shadows forever. The car's dashboard glowed, a photo of Elise taped beside a lead on the senator, a name, a place, a chance to strike. The city's pulse faded, but her speech's echo, a call to dismantle racism, rang in her ears, a verdict that wouldn't rest. The final image burned bright. Amara, her old gavel in her pocket, a relic of a lost bench, raised it in her mind, vowing to fight on, her will unbroken. The network's spectre, a challenge she'd meet with fire. The road stretched, the 90-degree darker canvas. Her fight a flame no senator could douse, her story a beacon for a nation watching, waiting, hoping. The story of Amara Wells, a black judge in Memphis, Tennessee, unveils profound lessons about confronting systemic racism with unyielding courage. Her battle against Officer Daniel Holt's violent racist assault and Chief Prosecutor Ronald Gaines's empire of corruption, from poisoning 60 black residents to evicting 300 families, reveals the depth of institutional bias. Amara's resilience, forged through Tanya's murder, Elise's kidnapping, and her erased judicial career, teaches us that justice demands sacrifice. Despite losing her bench, home, and sister, she exposed Gaines's voter suppression and a nationwide racist network, proving one voice can spark reform. Her courthouse speech, viewed by 20 million, shows the power of truth against lies, urging us to challenge systems that silence black lives. Amara's refusal to break, even when branded a terrorist, highlights the strength of community activists like Keisha and the rallied victims who amplified her fight. Yet, the senator's threat to undo her reforms reminds us that racism's roots run deep, requiring relentless vigilance. Amara's vow to pursue this new lead, gavel in hand, calls us to act, to question authority, and to support those fighting injustice. Her story isn't just a tale, it's a mirror, reflecting our role in dismantling oppression. We learn that hope, though battered, endures, and every step against racism counts no matter the cost. Comment below, what would you risk to expose a racist system like Amara did? Like and subscribe to join the fight for justice. Thank you for witnessing Amara's journey. May you find courage to stand for truth in your own battles.